Is that a thing that only happens with the mastering engineer, or why are the kicks always so different? Which had League of Legends LCS background, which made me go, wait, what? Is a car normal people don't even know exists, but damn, it is a beauty. Oh, so we were talking about micro pitch. How happy are you working with genres such as ambient / drone, experimental and new classical? By the way, are you supporting Wales? What would you say the differences are between high / low pass filters versus high / low pass EQ? Anything special for the 100th AMA? Chubby Chuv or Chevy Chase? I can't remember, is it Chubby Chuv or something? Hey guys, and welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It's Friday, it's time for another Ask Me Anything. Where does time go? It seems to fly. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video. Before I look at last week's video, I don't think there is any house admin. I'm just having a look at my notes now. And there is nothing. Oh, yes, there is. I've updated the tonal display playlist on Spotify. So for any of you guys that follow that playlist and listen to it, it gets updated every couple of weeks. It's been updated this week at some point. For any of you that don't follow the playlist, please do. There'll be a link below this video. It's, how do I describe it? It's usually, it gets updated every couple of weeks. It gets refreshed with a new hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours of just stuff that I like, stuff that I find inspiring, mostly on the sort of laid back side of electronic music. Yeah, I really don't know how to describe it. It's kind of almost genre-less, I suppose. Ambient, if you're gonna put a name to it, I suppose. It's just stuff I love, so click the link. It's free. You don't need to have a Spotify account or anything like that to listen to a Spotify playlist. I believe if you've got a free Spotify account, you can listen to it on shuffle, which is absolutely fine because I don't really put them in any particular order. I tend to sort of pick the first couple of tracks and the last couple of tracks in the playlist to be kind of chosen, but the rest of it's just, it is what it is. So yeah, check that out. I think that's it. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what I've been doing. Nothing spectacular. Right, onwards with the show. Last week was Ask Me Anything 89, which means this is Ask Me Anything 90. We are 10 weeks away from Ask Me Anything 100, which first of all, I think I've got to thank everyone watching this and asking questions especially, and especially those of you some of which have been asking questions almost every week for the last, well, what will be 100 weeks. I started this series thinking, it'll be 3 or 4 videos and then it'll frizzle out. I genuinely wasn't thinking it was going to get to 100, but it's great. I've enjoyed it. Right, starting at the top. Silent Warrior. Production question. Hi Dom, when I use a kick sample it sounds good at first, but in direct comparison to finished productions there is always a bit too much above 100 to 500 Hz. In tutorials I never see most good producers screwing big on the kick. They take a kick and produce. If I miss to recreate this sound, then I have to use a multiband compressor where the range is compressed below 50 Hz and the range above 50 to 100 is expanded. Usually compress again directly over the expanded range from 100 Hz. Fab Filter MB, this is crazy. Is that a thing that only happens with the mastering engineer, or why are the kicks always so different? We all have the same samples, or Sonic Academy Kick 2, it can't be that. Does Structures or Stoic sound different to you than what is released? Do you the mastering yourself? Do you do the mastering yourself? I've also seen your cool tutorial on Structures and Stoic. I mean, you didn't edit the kick too much. What's the secret of this different kick sound? There might be a couple of factors in that. So, first of all, I think with Structures and so speaking from my experience, well, first of all, in fact, you'll probably find that most tutorials, even my own, I go, oh, I'll just drag this kick and everything sits nicely. The fact is that kick in the original production might have been the 10th kick sample that I've used, or if I'm using kick 2, I might have started with a different kick, written the track, then got to about 70-80% of the track and then gone, oh, I don't like this kick anymore, I need to tweak it, and I'll tweak it here and there, and I'll just play around until it fits. And I think that's probably key to most music production. I always advise people at the beginning of a track, don't worry about your kick, just use anything, it's fine, just get the track done, because it's only when you're maybe 70%, you're 3/4 of the way through a production that you can really start to judge, do the sounds work with each other. And by that I mean, if you have a really deep, subby, smooth bass line and all nice, smooth sounds, and then you have this long, extended 808 kick, that's probably going to clash with your bass line, it'll clash with all your extended sounds, it's just not going to sound good. Whereas if you chop the end of that off and just use the transient and a tiny bit of body, then it might cut through nicely and sound good. But until you've written the most part of that track, you're not really going to know where it sits in the grand scheme of things. And it's always about the bigger picture. I think that's what we're listening for as a producer. We're always listening for the bigger picture. As for multiband compression, I mean, I always feel like if that works for you, that works for you, that's fine. It's not wrong. But in my opinion, I feel like if you are writing a track and you feel there's too much of one frequency or not enough of another frequency, or something isn't quite right with your kick, change the kick. Just use a different kick. It shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to keep going back to a kick necessarily. I mean, if you're using kick 2, then just tweak it slightly, or maybe try a couple of different samples or something if it's just not sitting right for you. It's kind of a tricky one. But going back to my own tutorials, for example, when I've written my track, that kick in the tutorial is maybe my 5th kick or something. It's a tweaked kick that probably wasn't the kick I started producing with. So in the tutorial it might come across as though, I've just grabbed this random kick and doesn't that work perfectly? Probably wasn't the case. I know for me personally, with the Structures or Stoic tutorial, I've gone into the original production and bounced off whatever kicks, or if I've used kick 2, I roughly know what it's going to sound like anyway, and I know roughly what I did or whatever. So I don't think I've tried to mislead anyone. I hope that's not coming across, but it's definitely not my first attempt at a kick. It definitely doesn't happen as naturally as maybe it comes across. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Then the other factor I suppose to talk about is, the mastering the mastering will change a kick, because the kick is essentially one of your loudest, probably the second loudest thing, other than the clap. The kick is probably the biggest transient and the loudest bass element, at least, of any music production. So it's a tricky one that I feel like mastering is not going to change your track drastically. And I have to be clear there, no amount of mastering is going to radically change your track, but it will probably, because the kick is the thing with the most or least dynamic range. It's the one thing that punches through the whole track. Whatever the mastering engineer does, which is going to be racking up a couple of compressors, tweaking some high frequencies and low frequencies, all of those things are going to have the biggest impact on the kick drums, because they're the biggest element of a track. So I think I've not done this, I've not listened, but by all means go ahead. If you listen to, let's say, Stoic, for example, listen to the finished version I did in my Sonic Academy tutorial and compare that to the final master. Stoic, I'm pretty sure I mastered myself. Sometimes I get a label engineer to do it for me. I'm pretty sure Stoic I did myself because I was quite comfortable with that. I was quite happy with how it sounded. Generally, I'll only use another mastering engineer when I'm just not happy with my own work. If you listen to the finished version I did in Stoic, whatever, in the Sonic Academy tutorial, and then compare the kick in that to the kick in the final actual released master, they're probably a bit different. I would have thought. I can't remember if I used a sample kick or kick 2 in that, to be honest with you. But even if I used a sample kick, I think they're still going to sound somewhat different, just because the mastering process is going to bring out the best bits of any kick drum, I suppose. So yeah, I don't think there's any secret. I think with the tutorials, be careful in how you watch it, because for anyone who's doing a tutorial, we've already made that kick before we made the tutorial, so we've already had that stressing over it for 2 hours and pulling our hair out wondering why it didn't sound the way we wanted it. We've had all of those moments. We just didn't film that bit. The bit we did film was going, oh yeah, I need to cut out the body, or I need to lift the transient, or I need to whatever it is we need to do. We're kind of forever backtracking in tutorials, because we want it to be smooth and forward moving for you guys. You don't want to watch. The reality is, if I was to make a track in real time and film it, which I'll probably do on live streams one day, the reality is in a 10-hour stream, I'll probably get quarter of a track done. So there's a lot of work in there. Hopefully that helps, though. Moving on. Gold Toast. Hey Dom, time goes by so fast. Now I don't even have time to figure out a question in a week. Anyway, I got Dom Kane's serial number as a suggestion from this video, which had League of Legends LCS background, which made me go, wait, what? 1 second in, and I instantly recognised the track, released in 2013. Still a banger. Thank you very much. That track used to be on the LCS all the time. Still play LOL, that's LOL with a small L, League of Legends, and watch the LCS to this day. Crazy to think you made good music in 2013, and probably even before that too. It would be a couple of years before I even see a door. So, question. How in the world did that happen? Did they contact you wanting a few tracks for the LCS, or was there maybe a submission process? Also, I didn't know you were a car guy. Giulia Quadrifoglio is a car normal people don't even know exists, but damn, it is a beauty. You're damn right it is. It's my dream car. I honestly, other than the Ferrari F12 TDF, I think the Giulia is my favourite car ever. I would offer me Lamborghini Huracan, no thanks. I'd rather the Giulia over that any day. Yeah, anyway. So, League of Legends, that was actually kind of out of my hands, if I'm honest. There wasn't a submission process or anything. I happened to get an email from a friend who said a friend of his was in desperate need for some dance music and to put together for some library stuff. Could I give him a hand? It was paid work, and it was, I can't remember, it wasn't much. It was just, you know, let's say $100 for a track or something. It was enough for me to go, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, that ended up then getting on to, I think it was the Universal Production Music Library, and that's kind of my first step into how I then started producing for Universal. But yeah, so once that ended up on the library, I don't know what the deal was, to be honest, because I signed the deal with the guy putting together the album for this library, and I didn't really know what happened to it beyond then. So I assume League of Legends contacted them saying, we want this kind of music and blah, blah, blah. And my music happened to fit. But I'm chuffed that it was used because, yeah, it's quite nice sort of seeing it on YouTube, because a lot of my music, you know, I'll hear it on TV or whatever, and so I've heard it on the background of, well, British shows like EastEnders or Australian shows like Home and Away, you know, and it's always a bit weird hearing it, but it was nice to sort of see it used in something that's a bit closer to me, because I don't watch soap operas and stuff like that, but yeah, so anyway, yeah, that was cool, and I'm very chuffed that they used it. Moving on, Cavacay, great AMA, Don, useful as always. Time, high five. I've noticed Goldtoast said time as well. High five to you. Silent Warrior, did you use the word time? Probably somewhere in there, so you get a high five. Cavacay. And yep, you nailed it. Dirty money kind of sums up the whole fame, celebrity, towie mentality. Unfortunately, I know what the word towie means, so I'm not far enough removed. Sorry, but I used them in anger term. I mean for a production project rather than a quick mess about. My bad. Oh, so we were talking about micro pitch. Funnily enough, I'm glad you've brought this back up, actually, because I have played with the micro pitch tool this week, as I think I said I probably would last week, working on a couple of album tracks, which so far haven't become anything fruitful, but I did start playing around with micro pitch, and it's awesome. Yeah, it's brilliant, because you can, you know, this is one of the beauties of Bitwig, and I apologise to anyone watching that isn't a Bitwig user, but if you're not a Bitwig user, then where have you been? You should be. The ability to open up the micro pitch and then assign something like a classic LFO, and then randomize the LFO to then randomize the micro pitch, and then use an envelope follower to modulate the amount of the LFO that modulates the micro pitch, which is what I did on a track, and it did sound really, really nice, because it meant the harder you pressed it, the more random the pitch stuttered slightly, whereas if you played softer, it was more on pitch, I suppose. Yeah, which I thought was great. So I'm definitely getting into that, and I like it. I think it's a brilliant tool. My bad is a silly phrase, a deplorable habit I picked up in my previous corporate life. But you answered the question. You haven't used them yet. I'm curious to know how others are using these more esoteric features of Bitwig. So yeah, there we go. I've just given you an example of how I've used it. Yeah, and I think these are, this is where music production, I hope, is heading, or certainly the tools are getting more and more creative now, because, things like an envelope follower, well, 10 years ago, that, I mean, they almost existed, but it was really just a dream. Whereas now, to be able to just throw in an envelope follower and know exactly where you're going with it, is, I mean, props to Bitwig. It's a huge leap forward in production. Some questions about Kane Audio Services. How happy are you working with genres such as ambient/drone, experimental and new classical, or whatever they're calling Niels Fram these days? I know you mentioned songs on the website, but I'm guessing a song that lasted for 40 minutes might be taking the piss a bit for a quoted rate. How would you charge for that? Lastly, so that's a different question. I'm fine with any genre. Yeah, pretty much, to be honest, because I think, there are some genres where maybe the mixdown needs to be slightly more specialist. An example being drum and bass. The mixdown almost makes a drum and bass track, and dubstep to an extent. So I don't think I would be. I mean, it's kind of tricky, but I think I'd be fine at doing a mixdown for drum and bass or dubstep or whatever, because I understand the science and the engineering behind getting a good mixdown. Whether I would be the best creatively is very much not going to be the case. It's not even debatable. I wouldn't be. So I don't think I would be the best option for money, but that doesn't mean I can't get the job done. So I think with certain genres, I think it depends on where the artist is and where they're going, I suppose. But in terms of ambient drone, yeah, I'm completely open to that. And the experimental new classical, as you say, whatever they're calling Niels Fram, I have no idea. I don't follow genre names. I don't even know what kind of music I do, let alone other people. So for a song that lasted 40 minutes, there's a reason I've used the word song, and that's purely because I felt if I used the word per track, let's say my mixdown rate is £1 million per track, well, some people call channels tracks in a production, and if you're using 80 channels, well, is that going to be 80 million? Did I say dollars or pounds? Whatever. Is that going to be 80 million for the whole song? So I'm calling it a song as in the piece of music, basically. And I don't know if I've done that clear enough on the website, but that's why I used the word song. The other reason is because I've mentioned this before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do think if you have a full range of vocal recordings, including harmonies and layers and pans and edits, then a mixdown for a vocal is almost doubling your job. And depending on how big that job is, I also work with somebody else, a good friend of mine who is amazing at mixing vocals. So I've kind of quoted that additionally if it's a vocal track. Clearly, if it's just one stem of a vocal that's pre-mixed, then fine, that's part of a normal mixdown. So there's kind of caveats in everything. But a 40-minute track, again, I'd have to listen to it because, excuse me, with a 40-minute track, I think I could potentially do it for the same price if, for example, the snare drum you use at the beginning of the track is the same snare drum 40 minutes later and the bass line doesn't change too much. I think, in a 40-minute piece of music, so long as the instruments aren't fluctuating too far, then technically would come under a similar price. Maybe it would be a bit more because it would take longer to import, export, listen, and all of that. I'm not sure. I've never really been sent a 40-minute piece of music, to be honest. So I can't say I've ever thought about it. But I guess I guess the point I'm trying to make is it might not be as much as you'd think it would be, more than a 3-minute piece, because it's really about the amount of instruments you're mixing rather than the amount of time you're mixing them for. But again, that also depends on things like dynamic ranges and stuff like that. If it's an acoustic drum kit, then you're going to have to monitor compressors for 40 minutes. So that's going to take a substantial amount of time. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Lastly, once you get your garden studio done, would you be okay with attended sessions, say for an EP or an album? Absolutely, that's the plan. Much like with my last studio, I made sure that there was enough space to have a second person in so that you could come in, sit down, listen to whatever, we'll talk it through and get the job done. The plan with the garden studio is to be exactly that. It's obviously going to be smaller than the last studio because the last studio was in an industrial estate. But the plan is to have enough space for a second person to sit down comfortably. Unfortunately, in this room, and for those of you that are new to the channel, I have been in this temporary, that feels like forever, back room of the house. So yeah, there's not really enough room for 2 people in here. There we go. By the way, are you supporting Wales? Nice easy win to kick off the tournament. Shocking defeat by Italy. So this is Six Nations rugby. Delete as appropriate. I wrote this beforehand. I reckon France might take the crown this time. Strong team right now. Well, you did predict that quite well. So nice easy win in terms of Wales. Oh yeah, it was. That was a great game. And as for you reckoning France might take the crown, well, by the looks of what they did to England, you could be right. So yeah, it's looking like it's going to be an exciting time. Andrew Hollis, time, high five. Maybe a blindingly obvious question, but I'll ask anyway. What would you say the differences are between high/low pass filters versus high/low pass EQ, and in what situation would you choose EQ over filters and vice versa? That's not an obvious question. That's a pretty good question. I can see my timer is coming up to the 30-minute mark, so I'm just going to hit reset now. Otherwise, I'll get cut off halfway through a sentence. There we go. High, low pass. So the difference between filters and EQ, basically. There are fundamental differences in terms of DSP, how they're made, how they're programmed. You have... so some of this could be wrong. It's from off the top of my head, which is never a good source. You have different types of filters in different types of encoding filters, I suppose, and each of them have their own pros and cons. You've got, for example, one of the most common forms of filter is a Butterworth filter, I think. It's taking me back to my engineering degree now. And a Butterworth filter has a Z plane or Q factor, which is your resonance of, I can't remember the amount, but it's whatever, depending on the steepness of the filter. So if it's 10 dB per octave, you'll have a Q factor of, say, 1 dB, whatever. Basically, you have a spike of resonance. And then you've got filters like, oh God, what's that Russian sounding one? Chubby Chuv or Chevy Chase? I can't remember. It's a Chubby Chuv or something type of filter. Anyway, look, there are a whole load of different types of ways of processing filters, I suppose. And each of these can be represented in slightly different electronic circuits. To give the most famous version, I suppose, is the Moog ladder filter. So Dr. Bob Moog, I think he invented the ladder filter, which has a very pleasant sound to it, and is now what we know to be the filter that everybody kind of chooses. So that's that. So every kind of filter. So the reason I'm saying that bit first is because filters themselves will have slightly different characters depending on the way they're processed. Then nowadays, is even more so, you can program character into them even more. So that's even, that sort of complicates the issue in the first place. So then you've got to ask, well, what is an EQ? An EQ is kind of all of those things wrapped into one package. So depending on whether you used, if you wanted to just lower from 15k upwards, you could use a low pass filter and just scoop down and set it to, say, 10 dB per octave steepness, or you could use an EQ and have a high shelf and bring that down a few dB. There are a whole host of different ways of achieving it. So really it's kind of difficult to compare, because the best comparison would be just comparing all filters against each other and then deciding how an EQ is built on using which filters. So I don't know if I've gone way too far with this answer, but in a weird way, there's almost no difference because the differences are so different. But at the same time, there's almost no difference because it also depends on where you're using it in a production and how you're using it. So if, for example, you just want to scoop the high end out of a snare drum, then it kind of doesn't matter. You'll have some artifacts, but the snare drum is probably going to be compressed and reverbed, and it's covered in kick drums and hats and whatever else anyway, so it kind of doesn't make a huge difference. It's like I've said before about people talking about their favorite compressors and compressors offering character and whatever, which I don't dispute that they do, but the bigger question is, if you're writing a top 40 hit and you've used a Fairchild compressor, an original £30,000 Fairchild compressor on the kick drum, and it's laced in hundreds of other instruments and then mastered and then exported as WAV and then converted to MP3 and then downloaded and then played on the radio and compressed on radio broadcast FM broadcast transmissions. Is the end listener going to go, oh, that's a Fairchild compressor? They're not going to. They're not going to recognise the character of it. So are these things important? Only if you think they're important. So in terms of the difference between filters and EQs, there are slight differences. There are slight differences in the resonances. There are slight differences in character, and this is how you get character in things like multiband compressors, filters, EQs. They all have individual character to an extent because they're built on a slightly different circuit or a different process, and each of those, when you go into the DSP of a filter, has a different Z factor or Q factor or a resonance point. And so, even though when you're looking at an EQ or a filter on something like Bitwig, the curve is quite clearly a smooth line, the reality is not really that smooth. The reality is you can have bumps and peaks and troughs along that, depending on the frequency, the time, the sample rate, the Z plane, which is a mathematical imaginary number section which ends up becoming resonance. It's all very weird, and I'm no good at explaining any of it. But the point being is that these things will have slightly different character. Are you able to hear someone sweep a filter and go, oh, that's this kind of filter? probably not. So yeah, hopefully that answers. So it's not an obvious question, I would say. In fact, it's probably way more complicated than you wanted it to be. Moving on. Not Your Human. Love the videos, Dom. Time. High five. Anything special for the 100th AMA? Can't believe I've watched all of them and enjoyed every minute of it. Well, thank you very much for watching all of them. Yeah, like I said at the beginning of this, it's an odd thing to have done 100 question and answer sessions, and I feel like we still haven't run out of questions or answers, which is great, and that's how it should be. So anything special? No, not really. I would like to do something special. I just don't know what that would be. There's a part of me that thinks maybe I'll do a live stream, but actually what you end up with then is, I mean, these things are basically recorded live. As you can tell, I've not stopped. There's been no take in this other than to reset the camera. It's the camera that stops me doing it all in one take. So I kind of feel like maybe a live broadcast probably isn't, it's not going to make any difference, is it really? Other than you watch it and hear it in lower quality. So yeah, but by all means, please, if anyone has any ideas or suggestions for what to do for the 100th AMA, I'm all ears, because I haven't got a clue what I can do that's different, other than maybe do it from a different location. I don't know. Yeah, you tell me. That's kind of the weird thing with these AMAs as well, is I didn't expect them to be this long, because it's you guys, the viewers, that are in control of the content, because you're the people that ask the questions. So all I can do is try and answer them as best as I can, you know, but whether that's valuable to you or not, I have no idea. You know, it's not up to me. So there we go. Yeah. And then finally, Yanis Lukmanis, time. High five. That, my friends, is it. Do you know what? There's an obvious one here. If you've made it this far into the video, then please comment the word downforce, because that's now being recommended. My own track, which is a bit sad for me, but yeah, there we go. Yeah, I don't think there's anything major coming up next week. It's all good. So I will see you this time next week. Thank you very much. Cheers.